Good evening. I am Martin L. Shoemaker presenting the Instant Story Hour, where story comes first. And my lovely and talented assistant for tonight is Writers of the Future, Stephannie Tallent. And Stephannie, take it away.
All right. So I was going to be reading two snippets because when Martin told me, oh yeah, read like 2 to 3,000 words, I was like, okay, my story is short. I'm going to be getting through most of my story. So first off, so I decided to do two different pieces that are very different. The first one is from my Writers of the Future story, Life and Death and Love in the Bayou. And let me get going. I have a teleprompter. I'm one of those people who likes to use a teleprompter. It works for me. So, all right. Life and Death and Love in the Bayou. It was the February the rain fell so warm and hard, the bayou swamped over old man Rochambeau's gator curing shack, and the whole parish smelled like graveyard mold and sour-smelling gator shit. Even the houses built up on stilts above the high water line that I decided to help my mama once and for all, no matter the cost of my soul. About that shed. I knew old man Rochambeau would just hit up my mama to use the ham hut for his haul, and she'd say yes, so I didn't feel too bad. Not for him, anyway. I felt bad for my mama, who'd be stuck bumping up against log-shaped hunks of gator meat while she seasoned and cured the hogs. Touch one of those logs of meat, and it's like the Spanish moss is dragging across the back of your neck, like the spirit of the gator is still there and pissed off and just waiting to chomp on you and roll you. Those spirits are truly there, lurking to garner just a bit of power, enough to touch the living world. I know because I see them. Granny said I'm blessed, just like her and her granny before, and I got to keep it secret. What we see, we can touch, and what we touch, we can control. And some men don't like us women having that power, call us witches, and do worse than call us names. And sometimes that power just ain't enough to keep a body safe. Many a blessed woman's been beaten or hung in this parish, either too weak or too despairing to fight back. So, best keep it hidden. The rain seemed to feed the spirits, restoring them closer to life. It made me itch to see them, test them. Mama didn't make me help with slaughtering the hogs anymore, not after that first time when I was 10. I screamed for days till my throat bled, and then I sprayed blood just like those cutthroat hogs. I get to go exploring on my own now when it's butchering time, which is fine by me. Don't get me wrong. I know I can't afford weakness. Since that autumn 6 years past, I've learned to not flinch away well from nature red in tooth and claw. Death is part of life, necessary for life. Trying to build up I don't want to say tolerance, but the way the world is, I need to be able to function in the face of violence. It's so hard sometimes. Nature's one thing. People hurt me other people, it twists my insides around. And why ain't I in school, you ask? School's for rich folks, not teenage swamp witches like me. Mama sent me through grade school. That was enough. I can read and write, sure enough, says I can scribble down what I see and learn on my own in a tattered red-covered spiral notebook. But they couldn't teach me nothing about the spirits of the bayou, and that's what I truly needed to learn. Granny told me I'd have to master my powers, else they'd master me, and I'd turn out like crazy old Calixte, half snake herself by now, undulating in the sulfur-smelling brown water, slipping through the roots of the mangroves, the little green flowers of the water spider orchids tangling in her long gray hair. Secretly, I thought submersing yourself into the magic of the swamp might not be such a bad thing, after I saw what Mama's most recent boyfriend, Leroy Bobinche, had done to her this last time, a week ago. Both eyes blackened and her slender nose crooked and one tooth lost and two more loose. I puked for half a day after that. The swamps just take you as you are. They don't lie to you, pet your hair, call you pretty, and then beat the tar out of you. Or come to your daughter's room, once the moon set, with whiskey-soaked breath and sweaty hands. Delphine, you just so pretty too. The swamps ain't safe, but they aren't mean for the sake of meanness. So that Monday morning, once the rain slacked off from near hurricane to drizzle, and Mama headed in to cashier half a day at the Big Star 30 miles away, I hightailed it down to Bayou Marrow, riding my beat-up rusted bike around rainwater-filled craters in the dirt road till the bare cypress branches, festooned with trailing Spanish moss, formed a cathedral roof overhead, and the road just drove itself into the swamp. The day was cool enough, the little droplets of salty mist tickling my face and back, soaking the white cotton of my blouse to see through, felt good against my skin while I was pedaling along. I got pretty chilled once I stopped, though. Didn't matter. I'd be sweating soon enough, slogging through the mud and weeds and water. The last good man Mama had been with was Charlie Soleil from the Isle of Jean Charles. He swore he'd be with her forever. Then he died in an oil rig accident 5 years ago. After that, it was like Mama thought she didn't deserve anything good in the world anymore. I could take care of myself. Leroy Bobinche hadn't been any good for a woman for a solid 2 weeks after he'd done tried to rape me. His suffering was well worth the morning of cramps and diarrhea I paid. I didn't tell Mama what he tried. She'd just blame herself like always. And I don't think she missed what he had anyhow those 2 weeks. She just worked so hard. She's so tired all the time. And Mama, I had to do something to help her. If you have the power to help someone, you have to help. That's just what's right. Today was St. Valentine's Day. I knew Leroy was coming over to see my Mama. Mama was a good Catholic woman despite her own heathen ma and daughter. I know that St. Valentine wasn't just one person even, and all that love crap ain't based on any sort of pious religion. And like with Christmas tying together capitalism and pagan rituals and Christianity, see, I told you I got some education. There were darker festivals, like the Lupercalia, predating today's holiday of hearts and flowers and candy. But when enough people believe something, it can become real, even if it was made up stories about finding true love despite the odds. Maybe I could do a little bit of Bayou magic to knot all the threads with all these things coalescing. Maybe I'd have the strength to make a difference, finally, with the rain-fueled spirits and the magic of the different beliefs all coming together. The swamp was quiet as I rode up, hushed by the cold iron-based steel of my bike. Soon as I got off it and laid it down in the poison ivy by the roadside, the chuckles and squeaks of a green heron broke the stillness. That set off a cacophony of chirps, splashes, and grunts. The bayou accepted me as one of its own since it realized who I was, away from my bike. Bayou Marrow looked the same and different, like it always did, depending on the tides and time of the year, storms present and floodings past. Verdant green everywhere, in the sunlight just breaking through the clouds. Kelly green swamp rose mallow leaves, dark green Spanish moss dangling from naked cypress branches, scums of acid green algae on the surface of the milk chocolate water. It smelled of lush decay, sour and rich in my nose and on my tongue as I gulped in the thick air like a beached bass. Decay that gave life. I was home. I'd worn just the white blouse and cutoffs over a faded black cotton sports bra and pink cotton bikini panties. I shucked off the blouse and jeans, baring my pale sunless skin, and waded into the knee-deep water, hoping any creepy crawlies would just crawl on out of the way. Have you seen what lives in the mud? Larvae like miniature dragons and monsters, and worse. A swamp moccasin glided on by, its thick body graceful in the water. Give my regards to Miss Calixte, I told it, and it nodded gravely as it gaped at me, showing the snowy white of its mouth. Just a friendly smile, not a threat display, not to me. The snakes don't bother me, nor do the mosquitoes. I've given enough blood, barking my shins on underwater branches, to sustain generations of bugs. And the snakes and other critters, politeness goes a long way, I've found. Kindness and politeness. You don't have to be some sort of Christian to know that you should treat others as you would like to be treated in turn. Problem was, lots of those who called themselves good Christians think that only applies to other Christians. Not folks like Charlie, working like a white man but living like his people, the Huma, or outright heathens like me and Granny, let alone the snakes and crawdads and gators, or the cypress, or the poison ivy, or even the most annoying mosquito. Leroy Bobinche goes to church every Sunday, dressing up in a cigarette-soaked black suit, with his stomach stretching a starched white dress shirt near the seams to splitting, and a black and gold fleur-de-lis patterned tie knotted around his thick neck. For the saints, you know. All right, so that was from my Bayou story. So, and apologies, I know I read that probably about a minute faster than I practiced. The next story that I want to read the opening from is a story that I sold to Pulphouse Magazine. It was for their most recent winter holiday issue. I want to preface this by saying that I know I'm writing a Pulphouse story when I'm writing it, and I'm like looking at myself and I'm giggling, and I'm like, I can't fucking believe I'm writing this, right? That's how I know it's a Pulphouse story. And this story was especially for my husband because he's a metalhead. And so it's called Santa Satanified. And here we go. Felix waited until his year mates had gotten their post-flight workout meal from the head trainer elf, then snuck his own basket of provisions to the furthest, darkest stall in Santa's reindeer stable. He was going to enjoy his oats and carrots and work on the lyrics to his newest gore metal song, despite the relentless cheerfulness of his surroundings. Everything was shiny in Santa's reindeer stable, the copper embellishing the waxed pine stall doors, the polished rose quartz and white marble tiled floor, hell on hooves, but it looked festive, the varnished pine support beams festooned with icicle lights and pastel multicolored bulbs. Ugh, disgusting. And it smelled of cinnamon and apples and sugar cookies. Ugh, just ew. Wasn't Santa aware of the existential dread inherent in a life's work built upon violating the laws of physics? Was the ceaseless cheer Santa's way of covering up his own fear? Or worse, Santa's boredom? Every year, same old thing. How soon before Santa snapped? Felix thought of these things daily, hourly even. Hence, metal. Though Felix was partial to apples. He hummed the riff to his newest song, tapping his hoof against the side of the stall, admiring the gleam of the steel spikes Frey had glued onto his hooves. If Frey, Fraser Kilmister, his assigned groom, but more importantly, his best buddy and bandmate, upped the speed on his guitar solo at this point in the song, that would bring it all home. And if Felix repeated the chorus, just changing the last phrase, that would, "What are you doing here, hiding in the stable? You're signed up for remedial. Get your skinny reindeer ass back out to the track." His father, Edward Rocket, kicked open the stall door. Felix scrambled to his hooves. His gut roiled as he stared up at his father. "No!" bleated Felix. His right rear leg trembled. He cleared his throat, then growled out, "No!" He stamped one black painted hoof. No fear. One of the steel spikes on the hoof zinged off. It thwapped against the closest stall door, dinging the shiny copper plating. His father, lead reindeer of the speed record-setting transatlantic team, was not impressed with Felix's defiance. "You will go to remedial flight training." He loomed over Felix, flexing his admittedly impressive muscles. "I don't want to play any reindeer games," Felix grunted experimentally. That sounded better. Reindeer throats weren't made for growling. Felix was testing out different metal vocal deliveries, growls, grunts, screeches, screams. He focused on stopping his legs from trembling. "We got to practice for the show." A music exec, all the way from Los Angeles, would be at the annual Winter Talent Show 2 months away, looking for the next big Christmas song. Granted, metal would be a hard sell, but if Felix and Frey skewed towards folk metal rather than Felix's preferred gore metal, and the exec was looking for something new, Felix had to try. He tossed his head, the spikes mounted to the tips of his antler nubs gleaming in the flickering multicolored Christmas lights, and glared balefully at his father. "Practice for the talent show? You can't even fly a mile in under a minute. That's what you need to practice." Edward Rocket assessed Felix. The boy was runty. He would just have to work Felix harder, get him caught up with his year mates. No son of his was going to be a subpar flyer. "Get over to grooming and have Fraser Elf wipe that crap off your face first," his father added. Frey had used charcoal to blacken the fur around Felix's eyes and speckled whitish-yellow lard to the rest of his face fur to mimic corpse paint. Considering the lard, remnants of rendered death, was bovine, a fellow hoofed creature, Felix thought that was particularly metal. It smelled rank. Frey had scooped it out of the kitchen trash, but that was metal too. Felix would never be able to please his father, so no point in trying. "I don't have to do what you tell me," screeched Felix, dancing around, his clattering against the marble and quartz floor. "Don't tell me what to do. Ah! You need a better songwriter, kid," said his Uncle Larson, sauntering into the barn. Uncle Larson was a confirmed bachelor and, for an old reindeer, pretty cool. Santa satanified! Reindeer dropped from the sky! That's better, Larson said. Felix leapt up and down, whipping his head in circles. Ah, hoof and mouth disease! Pus dripping from every deer's bodily cavities! Do not encourage the boy, said Edward Rocket. His brother-in-law, albeit a decent flyer, was a bad influence as far as Edward was concerned, too interested in the dark side of things. You know, he does have options, ventured Uncle Larson. The other guy. No son of mine is flying for the other guy. No son of his was going to the dark side. Who's the other guy? Asked Felix. If he had to fly, it was absolutely going to be for the other guy, whoever he was, given how alarmed his father was at the thought. Not flying for Santa, that easy listening, dim, jolly pansy ass. None of your business, said Edward Rocket. Felix threw back his head and screamed full-throatedly, his best Rob Halford imitation. Judas Priest, Uncle Larson said. Not bad. Hitting those high notes pretty good, kid. Maybe Felix could have Frey put together a really cool black leather harness. It worked for Halford, didn't it? And lots of spikes. You could never have too many spikes. And a black leather cap with holes for his antlers when they finally grew in. Do I have to get your mother involved? Uncle Larson turned his head and chuffed, a reindeer guffaw. No, replied Felix sullenly. His father could stick his own antlers up where the polar sun never shined, but Mama, she was fierce. Neither do you, Edward, said Uncle Larson. His sister Janice had every male at the South Pole under her hoof, including her husband. Why don't you two compromise? Felix, you go to remedial flight training, and then I can say I'm teaching you some Tesseract blinking tips afterwards to give you an edge. I mean, I'm not going to lie to your mama, but my lessons don't need to last as long as she thinks they will, and then you and your buddy can do band practice. I can do that, Felix said, widening his eyes beseechingly at Edward. Doe eyes don't work with that crap on your face. Get cleaned up and get to remedial training. I want to hear you've made exemplary progress or this deal's off. Felix nodded, then galloped towards grooming, hooves skittering on the polished floor. He couldn't wait to tell Frey. So now we have a scene break. But try as hard as he could, Felix still finished last in the flight training exercises. Sure, he was quick and agile, and with Uncle Larson's Tesseract tips, he could blink like no other deer, warping time and space like a strung-out string theory grad student hammering out their dissertation. Even Uncle Larson was impressed, but just don't push it too close, he cautioned. Make sure you're always out in the open, not in an enclosed space. Too many deer have died horrible deaths, cut in half when they miscalculate and blink too close to other solid objects. Felix hated to admit it, but he really loved blinking. Maybe not as much as metal, but blinking was just so cool. The whole, are you here, are you there, existentialness of it all. It's kind of goth, maybe, metal adjacent for sure. And the bad stories were perfect fodder for gore metal songs. But endurance and speed, the core of reindeer flight. Felix was smaller than his yearmates, and though metal had a solid history of amazing short men, Ronnie James Dio of Black Sabbath, and of course Dio had clocked in at 5'4". Danzig was 5'3" or 5'4", depending on the reference, and Angus Young of AC/DC was only 5'2". Record-breaking flight teams were stacked with tall, muscular reindeer, like his father. It's helping your singing, though, said Frey, lounging against a rolled-up wool rug in Uncle Larson's storage shed, a.k.a. the den of vice and gore, their hallowed practice space. Frey had pinned up posters, Black Sabbath, Cannibal Corpse, Wolves in the Throne Room, to inspire them. He had lit a black candle scented with ambergris and moss to further set the mood. Frey picked out a Byzantine scale on his guitar, shades of the king of the surf guitar. Dick Dale was metal, as was Johnny Cash if he sauntered over to the rockabilly side. May they rest in peace. All that cardio, I'm sure your lungs have gotten stronger, Frey added. Felix nodded. He decided that clean soaring vocals with grunts as needed suited his abilities best, and the length of time he could carry a high note had doubled. Yeah, but if I don't do better, he might make me quit the band. Don't think about that. Eye on the prize, that recording contract. We just got to decide, do we find a drummer or just settle with the drum machine? I think a drummer would be best, said Felix, but you've asked everyone. You assholes didn't ask me. A broad figure loomed in the doorway, blocking out the winter sunlight. White fluffy fur, pale blue face and hands, and a scowl to freeze a reindeer's balls. It was Lyra Yeti. Felix gulped. If Frey hadn't already been sitting, Felix was sure the elf would have cowered. What, nothing to say, shitheads? Said Lyra. She pitched her throaty voice falsetto. Oh, sorry, Lyra. We didn't think a girl would want to be in a metal band. She poked Frey in the thigh with one huge blue shoeless foot. Huh? Started Felix. He thought Frey was going to pee his lederhosen, which was sewn hot metal. Felix honestly hadn't thought of Lyra. She was quiet normally. Like many of the other Yeti employed by Santa, she worked in decoration. Being super tall helped with replacing burnt-out bulbs, freshening up the garlands, and dusting ornaments. I didn't even know anyone else liked metal, she continued. Then I heard about you guys forming a band. I want in. Felix and Frey glanced at each other. Metal was inclusive. They weren't going to say no, unless she sucked as a drummer. And it goes on from there. So I hope that was fun.
It was like Rankin Bass took acid.
so I thought it was fun. It was fun. And I think the two different stories are a good contrast. So
yeah, it's a good introduction to you. And that one I was grinning. I don't know how well it comes across on the screen, but I was grinning the whole time. I think you nailed it. Of you're going to tell this story with a straight face, and the listener's going to be the one with the big grin.
Right.
So, and you said this was already in Pulphouse or is coming out in Pulphouse?
Already in Pulphouse. Yeah.
So how many have you put into Pulphouse so far?
Two, I think, in the regular one, and then he bought a story about a dog making a religion, a very smart border collie puppy making a religion about farts. Okay. That showed up in one of his books. The story was called Sniff the Source. It's very cute also.
All right. For readers not familiar with Pulphouse, it is a magazine edited by Dean Wesley Smith, put out by him and his wife, Chris Catherine Rush, yes, through their WMG publishing. It is a very, very elite story-oriented magazine. The Dean has got 5.5 decades now in this field, so he has a real good sense of what he wants in a story. Chris is one of the only people in history to ever get a Hugo, both as an editor and a writer, so she has a strong opinion of story. So they are very particular, and the fact that you've now published with them 3 times tells me something about you, that you are someone who is hitting it when it comes to story. Because they want great, but they want a story that makes people sit up and pay attention.
So I think the stories that I've always sold to Dean are the ones. One of the first story that I sold to him was one that I had one of my husband's friends read. He's a super smart guy, reads a lot, and he read it. And I've asked him about this later. He said, "Oh, I didn't say that," but he did. He was like, "This was an abomination." I was like, "Yes!" Like nailed it. So yeah, and then the dog farting one was just, I thought it was super cute. And I've sold a couple to Chris for her holiday spectacular series that she puts out at Christmas. And I will do a quick plug for Pulphouse, if that's okay. They're doing a Kickstarter now, and for anybody who's interested, they usually hit all their stretch goals, and even if you support at I think they have it there what their lowest level of support would be to get it. Some of the stretch goals are the opportunity to write a story for them in each particular month, and that was the reindeer one. It was, as I said, for their holiday one. So that's a good way for people to try to get their work in front of them, because they normally don't do open calls right now. It's usually invite only. So yeah,
they have to know you, and that's not even enough. They have to know that you are a Pulphouse writer. They have to have seen in your work that you can do this. It's not the ordinary. It's a story that steps outside of the ordinary, and they have to believe in that. And so it's just invitation. So but once you've proven it like you have, now it's a little easier to get their attention.
Yeah, Dean, I may end up sending him my 24-hour Writers of the Future story because I think that'll be up his alley to a certain extent. I had to check with him about one thing, but yeah, it's out right now to another market, and um, I think it really is probably more of a Pulphouse story, though.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned you were in one of their anthology workshops. Again, for those who don't know, it's a teaching workshop that is teaching how to get into anthologies and how anthologies are edited and built. So you learn how your chances are, and how the process sometimes is just brutal because like they have needs. If you don't fit the needs, thanks. I'm glad you were here, but that's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And they don't waste your time when they reach that sort of decision quickly.
Right, right.
Educational
It
experience.
yeah, it's good, and it's so when you get for the anthology workshops, I've actually done a couple. They give you like once a week, you'll get what the anthology is, what the editor's looking for. Then you have a week to write your story, get it turned in. You do that for 6 weeks. This one that's coming up, it's just like that. In the past, like when Chris was doing her holiday spectacular anthology, where she would do three different anthologies, you would have the opportunity to do three stories in a week, and I never hit that. But there were times I got a couple. And then so you write everything ahead of time, and you turn it all in, and then you're supposed to read everybody else's stories, and you're supposed to read it as a reader. So if you like it and it keeps you going, you finish it. If you don't like it, you set it aside. And at the end part, one of the other exercises is you try to build your own anthologies also, just for fun. And it also kind of makes the other people feel better. Like maybe they didn't really sell it, but if they know somebody else liked their story, it can help. But once you get there, they'll have all the editors up on a high table, up on a dais, and then you guys are all everybody else is in the back, and they just start going through the stories, and they start. I think Dean said he's going to go first, and he'll basically say, "Yeah, it wasn't a Pulp House story," or it what he'll say like, "Oh, it's not a Pulp House story, so I stopped reading." Right. But then everybody else will give their opinion on whether they liked it and whether they would buy it or not. And until you get to the final editor, and that's what really matters. And that's one of the things they try to teach you is it doesn't matter if everybody else loved it. All it really matters is if the one you were trying to sell the story to loves it. And yeah, and so they'll pick the stories that they like, and sometimes they'll pick more. And then at the end, when it's all their turns, they'll kind of winnow it out. And you see, like, okay, if a story is too long, or if they may not have room for it. You see all the things like, okay, there were multiple stories like this, so they had to pick the one they liked the best, and it may be that the other story was not, the other story could have been perfectly good. It's just the other one suited better. And so they try to teach you that it's a matter of editor taste and preference and needs, not necessarily anything against your story, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yep.
So it's valuable. And I will say I got butterflies every time it was the time for my story to be discussed. But um, the first story I sold to Dean was at the first of those workshops I went to. And that was the one that my friend Cosmo had called an abomination. So it was interesting because he thought it wasn't a Pulp House story. And then everybody else, all the other editors are like, it's a Pulp House story. And so we had taken a break, and he came back after break, and he's like, I'm buying it, And I was like, I think I probably, knowing me, I was probably like, I'd probably squeed because that's me. And it was very exciting. So yeah.
Mhm.
So I do highly recommend those. They're kind of, even the anthology workshop is a little bit, I don't want to say it's necessarily invite only, but they don't let just anybody take it. They have to know that you can emotionally handle it, because some people don't take rejection well, right?
Mm.
And you're not allowed to argue with them. You're not allowed to defend anything. It is what it is, right? And some people get very unhappy about that. Um, when I asked Dean, I was like, do you think I'm ready for this? And he was like, yes, for the first one, because I'd been doing some classes and stuff with him. But yeah, it's a good experience. So
And they teach these, the in-person part is in Vegas, of course, right?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
So it's
Yeah.
nothing else. You get a trip to Vegas.
Yeah, but the thing is, you learn a lot too, because you've read these stories and you're supposed to be kind of seeing how how you would look at them and everything and see how it all works together.
Hmm.
So, so it's definitely a learning experience.
Yeah.
So,
Well, they've got long experience as teachers, and I think it shows that
yeah.
their teaching method is targeted at the lesson they're trying to get, but also at, okay, here you are. What do you need to learn?
Hmm. Yeah. And they treat everybody, I mean, they're very rare. I mean, they're kind and they're supportive, but they don't sugarcoat things. So that I think is really good also, you know. So,
And we are
but
at about the 30-minute mark here. So now it's time to move into the instant story show part of this. And you're going to give me a prompt, and then I'm going to dictate a story for a half hour. Well, less than a half hour because we have to have wrap up time. And I apologize in advance, colon. I am going to speak my punctuation, exclamation point. It's really helpful with Dragon Naturally Speaking, comma, the tool I use for transcription, comma. So I have built up this habit for the past 6 years to the point where sometimes I have trouble not speaking my punctuation, period. When talking to a computer, comma, and even sometimes when talking to people, period. If you ever catch me doing this in person, comma, just jog my shoulder and remind me that you're not a computer, period. So you have a prompt for me?
so I'm kind of like we talked about this a little bit earlier. I'm going to be kind of easy on you because I'm going to let you kind of make up your own stuff. But we have a young phlebotomist in the 1980s. She is stationed at an Air Force base in New Mexico, and this is her first posting. She works in a clinic on a base. She's not a Air Force personnel herself, but she works with the airmen and stuff. And her cat has gone missing.
Or what?
Her cat,
Her cat has gone missing. That is a
yes.
tragedy. Let me see if I can get, yes, okay. My keyboard sometimes cuts out when it sits idle for a long time. So I want to write this stuff down so that I've got a little bit of help remembering. Young phlebotomist in New Mexico,
In the 1980s.
1980s. Did you say Air Force Base or did I imagine
At
that?
Air Force Base.
Force Base.
And her
Cat
cat disappeared.
is missing.
Yes.
Okay. Laura tried not to look at the clock, period. If she looked, comma, she would have to notice what time it was, period. If she knew what time it was, comma, would know how late she was going to be, period. If she knew how late she was going to be, comma, she would have no excuse for not getting into her car and driving to the clinic, period. New line. And if she did that, comma, she would not be able to keep looking for Muffy, period. New line. And that was intolerable, period. She had only one thing in this whole world that loved her unconditionally, colon, Muffy the cat, period. If she didn't have Muffy, comma, she would have nothing, period. New line. Then she shook her head, period. She had her job, period. She had patients who depended upon her, period. She had cases that could only be solved with her help, period. It was ridiculous to say that she had nothing, comma, and she knew better, period. New line. But those cases, comma, those patients, comma, those doctors, dot, 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 none of them curled up in her lap at night and kept her company on a dark night with nothing but the wind outside. Period. New line. New line. But ultimately, comma, she had no choice. Period. She was going to be late, comma, she was going to get written up, comma, and she was going to risk her job, dash, dash. After all, comma, she was still new at it, dash, dash, if she didn't get going now, period. New line. So finally, comma, she left the screen door blocked open, comma, hoping that no one would sneak in from the neighborhood, period. The nearest bunkhouses were not that close, comma, anyway, period. And hoping that it was safe to leave the door open and some food out for Muffy as she went into work, period. New line. But that didn't stop her from checking her mirror 3 more times before she got out the drive and onto the dusty road, comma, heading to the clinic, period. Muffy, dot, 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 new line, new line. She was still worrying about the cat when she pulled into her assigned parking space at the clinic, period. Sometimes it was good to have this assigned space, comma, because on busy days, comma, the parking lot was full, period. There were days when every airman on the base brought their families in for one ailment or injury or another, comma, and parking was essentially impossible, period, except assigned seating for staff, or assigned parking for staff, period. New line. On the other hand, comma, the assigned parking was all the way at the farthest end of the lot, comma, and it was 97 degrees in the New Mexico sun, period. She'd need a change of clothing by the time she got inside, period. New line. Well, comma, maybe not that bad, period. It was New Mexico, period. People were used to sweat stains, period. New line. She parked the Jeep, comma, locked it, comma, and headed towards the building, period. New line. But halfway there, dot, 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 meow, dot, 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 new line. Muffy? Question mark. She looked around, comma, but saw no sign of the black and white cat, period. She had to have imagined it, period. Only Muffy meowed like that, period. But there was no sign, period. And here on the sizzling hot concrete blacktop parking lot, comma, there was no place for a cat to hide, period. New line. She shook her head, period. She was imagining things, period. The heat was getting to her, period. She had better get inside, period, before it got hot enough to give her sunstroke, period. New line. Meow. Dot, dot, dot. New line. Muffy! Exclamation point. She looked down, comma, but the sound, dot, 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 didn't come from down, period. She turned around. Where, period, where, period. Where was that cat? Question mark. New line. Meow. Dot, dot, dot. New line. The sound was dot, dot, dot. On top of her head? Question mark. She tapped her hair, comma, and there was no sign of a cat up there, period. She should have known anyway, comma, since there was no weight up there, period. But that's where the sound came from, comma, damn it, exclamation point. Right on top of dash, dash, new line. Meow. Dot, dot, dot. New line. Dash, dash, right inside of her head. Period. New line. What the hell did that mean? Question mark. New line. She took 5 steps backwards, comma, looking around herself, period. Meow. Dot, 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 new line. The sound was still inside her head, period. 5 steps forward, comma, and then another 5. Dot, 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 new line. Meow. Dot, 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 new line. She spun around slowly, comma, looking up, down, everywhere, period. There was no sign of the cat, comma, but in her head, dot, 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 meow, dot, 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 new line. She was still trying to puzzle that out, comma, frustrating herself, comma, not realizing just how bad things were getting, comma, when she passed out from the heat. New line, new line. She awoke on a table in the phlebotomy clinic, period. She was looking up at the lights overhead, comma, the old Army issue fluorescents, period. Did they still make those, question mark? Probably not, comma, but the Air Force had them in stock by the thousands, period. They might never run out, period. New line. Then she turned her head and looked to each side and noticed that she had an IV dripping into her arm, period. Fluids, period. Saline, comma, probably, period. Laura usually took things out of the arm, comma, not put them in, comma. So she wasn't an expert on intravenous therapy, period. But saline was the obvious, period. Heat stroke left you short of fluids and electrolytes. And so this was likely the therapy to get her conscious to the point where someone could, dot, 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 new line. Laura? Question mark, new line. She looked over to the far side of the room where Maria Sanchez was dabbing the arm of a patient, comma, swirling the alcohol on the exposed flesh and slipping in a needle, period. The woman didn't even flinch, period. Maria was a phlebotomist. Patients never felt her needles go in, period. New line. Maria, comma, what happened, question mark, new line. That's what I'm supposed to ask you when you wake up, question mark, or period. You're a native, period. You know better than to be out in that sun for that long, period. What got into you, question mark, new line. What got into me, question mark. Laura wasn't sure how to answer that question, period. The one thing she couldn't say was dot, 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 new line. Meow, dot, 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 new line. All right, we're a minute or so ahead of schedule, but this seems like a good point for you to throw me a curveball if you've come up with one here.
Okay, so she's looking around. It looks like the clinic. It looks like Maria. It's not really Maria. It's not really the clinic.
Okay. Still no sign of that cat, period. Where was Muffy? Question mark. How could she, dot, 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 new line. Well, comma, Maria said, comma, if you're up and about, comma, we've got patients out there, period. You need to Go sign some in, period. Get their paperwork signed, period. We have got a lot of patients lined up, period. Have you seen that parking lot out there? Question mark. New line. Meow. Dot, dot, dot. New line. Laura darted back and forth. Laura's vision darted back and forth, period. Where was the cat? Question mark. New line. Then she realized that Maria had asked a question, period. Dot, dot, dot. Had she seen people out in the parking lot? Question mark. She had thought about a full parking lot, comma, and how hard it could be to find a space, period. But had she actually, dot, 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 new line. She couldn't remember, period. She remembered walking from her Jeep, period. She remembered hearing the cat, period. She remembered, dot, dot, dot. She didn't remember if there were cars or weren't, period. New line. Are you sure there's nothing in this besides saline? Question mark. Any drugs? Question mark. New line. Maria giggled, period. Why would we give you drugs? Question mark. All you need is hydration, period. Now get out there, comma, and get on that computer, period. Hurry, period. We don't have all day, period. New line. Laura sat up, comma, dropped her feet to the ground, comma, and headed towards the door to the registration area, period. New line. She had the door open and was halfway out before she remembered that she had an IV in, dot, dot, dot. She looked down, period. There was no tube, period. No needle in her arm, period. She looked back to the bed where she'd just been laying, comma, and there was no IV stand near it, period. New line. Maria, dot, 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 question mark, new line. Laura, exclamation point, as your supervisor, comma, I am ordering you, period. Get out there, period. New line. Yes, dot, dot, dot. Maria, dot, dot, dot. The door swung behind her, period. She couldn't remember, dot, dot, dot. Was Maria her boss? Question mark. There was some other doctor, dot, dot, dot. New line. Meow. Dot, dot, dot. New line. Muffy, comma, what are you doing to me? Question mark. New line. But there was no time for that, period. Maria hadn't been wrong, period. The clinic was full of people, period. Tall people, comma, short people, comma, dirty people, comma, clean people, period. All sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds, period. New line. Yet not a single Air Force uniform among them, period. These must all be dependents, period. And she had to check them in, period. New line. With a sigh, comma, she sat down at the computer, comma, grabbed the mouse, comma, opened the window, comma, and started typing in patient information from an old woman who handed her a card, period. New line. Laura had the form halfway filled in, comma, before she remembered, dot, dot, dot. I never gave it my password, period. I never, dot, dot, dot. New line. Meow. Dot, dot, dot. New line. Muffy was there, comma, with her, comma, somehow, period. Somewhere, period. New line. But the old woman tapped her card, pointed at the screen, and glared, period. Laura turned back to the computer, comma, and entered the rest of the information, period. Name, comma, address, comma, flight division, comma, sector assignment, comma, weapon specialty, ... New line. What the fuck? Question mark. What sort of patient information was ... New line. Meow. ... New line. The old woman stared straight into Laura's eyes, period. Without a word, comma, she slapped Laura, comma, and then pointed at the keyboard, period. Meow. ... New line. The woman looked around, comma, as if trying to find ... New line. Meow. ... New line. Suddenly, comma, the woman grabbed the keyboard out of Laura's hand, comma, pulled it away, comma, and stabbed the return key, period. New line. And just like that, comma, the woman vanished, period. The keyboard fell to the ground, period. A scrawny teenage boy behind the old woman picked it up, comma, handed it to Laura, comma, and gave her his purple identity card, period. New line. This kid was a psychological operative? Question mark. New line. Meow. 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 Muffy was in trouble! Exclamation point. In a fight with someone, comma, somewhere, comma, and Laura had to help, period. Muffy! Exclamation point. I'm coming! Exclamation point. The keyboard fell out of her lap, comma, smashing to the floor as Laura pressed through the crowd, period. But they wouldn't part for her, period. Suddenly she was pressed by a cloud of smelly, stinky bodies that smelled like diesel fuel? Question mark. Something, not normal sweaty bodies, period. Something mechanical, period. New line. Get out of my way! Exclamation point. Now! Exclamation point. She tried shuffling her way through the crowd, comma, but it had no chance, period. They were making a wall to stop her, period. New line. She turned back to the clinic room, period. She pulled on the door, comma, but it was ... It wasn't locked, comma. It was gone, period. There was a knob there, comma, but there wasn't even a real door, comma, just an outline drawn in chalk, period. There was no escape, period. There was ... But then Laura saw the window, comma, with the desert scape beyond, comma, and she took the only chance she had, period. She bolted for the window, comma, leaped, comma, covered her head with her arms, comma, and smashed through the window, period. New line. New line. She brushed broken glass off her arms and legs, comma, seeing blood, period. Little scratches all over, period. There was broken glass in her hair, comma, as she lay ... New line. on her carpet, question mark, in her apartment, question mark. New line. With muffins sitting on her chest, comma, licking her face, question mark. New line. Had she never left, question mark. New line. Had she been lost, comma, and Muffy looking for her, question mark. New line. She could almost believe that, period. It almost made sense, period. New line. Except for the small, comma, bloody corpse sitting by the door, comma, slashed to ribbons by sharp cat claws and razor-sharp teeth, comma, shredded like a rag doll, period. A rag doll that had the old gray matted hair of the old woman, period. But a body like nothing ever born on earth, period. New line. New line. Ha! Just at the time. Most of these I've not been able to finish the story in time, so I've got to come later.
I was hoping you'd go with aliens. I was thinking aliens.
I was not the slightest clue where I was going. It was, where was the cat? Where was the cat? Where was the cat? Is the cat in her head? And then when you threw me the curveball, I realized it's not the cat who's someplace. It's her that's someplace, and the cat is the rescuer.
So, yay.
Thank you. That was a fun one. And I will get that transcribed and cleaned up. It's going to take me a little while. I am way behind on these. I'm biting off a lot with these, that I need to have free weekends to do transcription on these. And I've got the transcription done for episode 1. And I think this is episode 5. So I'm a little behind. But this one, at least I don't have to go and finish, because that's part of it, is that the other ones, I've got, like, the first episode ended up more than twice as long when I finished recording it as this initial session. And the second one's going to be longer, and the third one, and they're just, people are giving me big ideas. You gave me just enough.
I tried to do a small idea. Yeah.
Yep. So it's like probably I'm going to say probably a 1,500 word story, which is very short for me. But especially when you gave me the curveball, because the curveball steered me towards a good ending. Otherwise, I was going to have to figure out more about where is this lost cat and how does she get there? When I realized she's the one lost, then the ending came pretty quickly.
So, good.
I thank you for that. And I thank you, Lance, for joining us. Looks like we lost James along the way, but I understand he's a busy man. This will be recorded and edited, ready to go probably in the morning. I will send your copy out and then get it up on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube.
Awesome. And thank you so much for having me. This was fun. So
thank you. And thank you, Lance.
Thanks, both of you.
Kitchen.
thanks.
Thanks.